Hey everyone, this is Jan and you're watching an episode of Making Phosphor, my little science fiction adventure comic book. And this episode is all about writing. So, what you're looking at right over here is a new page that I'm inserting into the pages I've already got. The pages I've already got that I'm referring to are my little indie comic book, Fosphor, which is a science fiction adventure comic book. Here's some of the rough ink version pages that I have yet to do. This is quite the episode, so you better strap yourselves in. I'm going to talk about writing, yes. However, it's complicated. I find it hard to find the right words to describe what I have been trying to conclude about where I'm at with my comic book story, and so it might just get a little rambly. I might be editing the hell out of this to get all the ums and pauses out to speed things along. But while working my office job here in Barcelona, Spain, in my spare time, I've been working on this comic book based off the story I started writing in my initial run of 100 Days of Making Comics. And now, after all this time chugging along, the end is in sight. I am now ready to evaluate all the hard work I've been putting in. So I've lined them up over there. I am ready to have a very hard look and see where some improvements can be made. You know, I'm starting to have some second thought about the flow of the story and how it might appear to you guys once you get to read this in its current state. And some of it is second guessing. However, some of the problems I've been having have stuck. But let's start at the beginning. How did I get started on writing this comic book in the first place? How did I begin writing Phosphor? Of course, it was with the 100 Days of Making Comics that I decided on day one, 2 years ago, according to YouTube. I just looked up the time. It feels like much longer, actually. I don't think that's right. Let's see. If I've been living in Spain for 3 years, and it's 3 years ago, there's no way it was 2. Oh my God, it's been 3 years. Phosphor started originally, including the name and everything, as a superhero comic book. And I wanted an origin for this superhero, and I wanted to give him his own city. You know, like Superman has Metropolis, Batman has Gotham. And I wanted the city to be, because I was thinking in terms more of video games at the time, I wanted the city to be something that would require a hero like him and a suit of armor like him to come to the rescue. So I wanted to come up with a sci-fi city that would require that kind of hero, and I wanted an origin for his suit of armor. And as I was throwing tons of ideas into my notebook over many years, once I decided to get down with the 100s and work on my comic book every day, I decided to pick this story that was completely unfinished and just, floating around in my head. And I decided to start on day one with writing down the story. Starting at the very beginning, and once I had that kind of laid out like a first story arc, it wasn't before very long I had 4 story arcs, and realizing that I had fallen into the trap of wanting to write my own Star Wars, giant universe franchise, and dug myself in a little too deep. I thought I would just focus on that very beginning and just cut it down and just what is a small enough chunk of this story that I could tell within a reasonable amount of time. And then by the end of 100 days, I end up with 10 pages for people to read. That's the Phosphor issue 0. which is still on Gumroad if you want to read it. It's heavily influenced by films like Alien and The Thing, and so I decided to run with that genre completely and use it as a template, which helped a lot with the writing. For example, in Alien, you have a scientist character, just like you have a scientist in the Thing. You have a group of people who are just there to do a job, like on a rig, or and a discovery is made, and like people protest and debate the discovery. Like there's certain flows, ebb and flows to the story. There's particular kinds of characters, just like in slasher movies, you have particular kinds of characters. And so when you try and enter this genre on your own, you get to put a little twist on it, but you also, like, when you don't know what to do, it kind of fills in the blanks. That's what I mean by having it's like having a template, quite frankly. It's a good thing. Now, as I've got this lying behind me, you can imagine that I've worked out so much of the kinks in the plot, and I've worked out so many of the characters. There's so much about them always in the back of my mind when I get to making a page, that I've discovered I'm omitting certain story beats. To me, everything is perfectly clear. Like, I know these people, I've lived with them for 3 years, and I seem to be forgetting really basic beats and explanations, actually putting it on the page for you to read. For me to have enough distance to it, because I've taken so long, to now be able to read it and be like, hang on. If I ask myself the question, who is this person? I immediately come up with the answer. And then I ask myself, so where is that on these pages? And this is how I've been finding these little missing story beats. So, in other words, it sucks. I'm gonna have to start over. No, just kidding. So let me take you through how I go about making a comic book page for a second and show you some of the problems I run into, so you can understand how I created some of these bigger structural problems, missing story beats, in the comic book. And I think it'll be easier for me to show this, how I make these mistakes in art, because I'm not a writer and I've been trying to write, but it's so, it's just, and it's visually. It's visual, so it's just a little easier for me to put my finger on where it hurts, as I've just been rambling. I noticed. Sorry about that. Yesterday I finished a page. It is now Sunday, and I'm hoping, if I work hard, to finish another page. If I don't spend too much time on this video, of course. But I'm very excited about this new page that I'm inserting with the blue pencil, which is always a pain to show up on these videos, but I think today the lighting is just right. An upshot, which originally in the sketch, let me just pull that out. These are my rough pencils. There's a particular scene where a relic is found, an artifact, a human skull, and from it is taken the wisdom tooth, which holds a clue. If that sounds all very weird, that's because this is a science fiction story and all will be revealed and make perfect sense. So the person making the discovery, who I call the taskmaster, is leaving the scene on a previous page and going up into his little office where no one is allowed, where he's going to do a little bit of research. So I get to show more scenery, I get to show him private quarters, and of course that allows for a lot of background stuff that will not be spoken about, but will help reveal more about his character visually without having to explicitly state it. And so here he is, kicking back and reminiscing about the good old days. And then for the hell of it, I thought, something gruesome like a brain or a skull in a jar. because why not? So this is the part where I, as an artist, we're not even talking about the writing, we'll get back to it later, but as an artist, how I've been making problems for myself that now make the comic book not as it should be. I have to be fully honest here. I was dreading drawing this turnstile staircase. It already doesn't make any sense here because there's a different piece of there's a different metal beam here and I don't continue it, and it's like just thinking about drawing this in 3D, I thought I was already looking for reference and hoping to find a picture of a top-down view, and then I thought, like, why am I spending so much time? Just draw a boxy staircase. And instead of looking down, I just quickly got the idea of looking up, and then a big boxy staircase going up. So that sounds like a perfectly good solution to a tricky artistic problem, right? However, one of the things I've come to realize writing is that subconsciously I am, how should I put it? There are certain scenes that the story requires, and this is where I have to push myself because I love drawing people, I love drawing faces, figures, but then placing them inside of a scene, interacting with other people, I noticed that when it comes to the layout of the pages, I tended to do a lot of close-ups and cut people off in certain ways, like the way I would frame it. And this was almost like a subconscious thing because I was trying to avoid what I found hard to draw. And at least that windy staircase was like a proper solution. That seems fine in itself. But so in writing, I was kind of doing the same thing. Subconsciously, I was just leaning towards the thing that I know how to do, kind of, and then avoiding the things that I find a little hard, and sometimes just being a little too subtle, you know? So these excuses that I've been making as an artist, trying to avoid the weaknesses in my ability, they've been adding up. I don't get enough feedback. As in, I don't seek out enough feedback. When I do get feedback, and some of it has definitely been good feedback, like critiquing, even though it's constantly the same feedback, like people find it hard to follow along, I make up excuses for myself, like, well, you say that, however, there's this one scene here that does explain it, rather than taking a step back and throwing a page out and redrawing it, or, as I've been doing this weekend, inserting a page and expanding on a scene where necessary. So that's where I'm at this weekend. I've found a number of points in the 18 pages that I had, 18 or 17 pages, where I thought, like, I know who this character is, I know their backstory, I know what they're going through at this moment. Is it on the page? No. Okay, insert a page and give that character a whole page to themselves. And let's see how that goes. And so I have added a scene for the Taskmaster that you just saw a little bit about, where he goes into his office and he makes the actual discovery that makes him realize, like, what is going on behind the scenes. So that's there. There's a whole new page of the two corporate spies, as I keep calling them, actually doing some investigating on a page, not just in a panel like I had before, but they actually have a whole page to themselves where they're doing part investigating, part debating, and one of the ways in which they do investigating is using like a spying technology. And so rather than having that in panels as I had before, but it's not pointed out at all, like there's no reason for you to notice it, again, like too subtle, it's actually held aloft. Like, hey, this thing. Without having to say anything about it, I could, but I don't have to. But it's like I'm showing you right now. There's also a new page in which I actually show things not working. Another one of those story beats that I only now realize that even though that's always obvious for me, it's simply not on the actual page. So how do I explain this? Because I've been working on this for so long, and I think one of the conclusions I reached this weekend, just thinking over all this, is that I didn't write a script. Like the way I actually work on these comic book pages and the story, like I've written everything down. I've got notebooks. I've used certain computer programs meant for, interactive stories and video games, and just to link everything together and to be able to move the plot around and everything. But I didn't write an actual script. And I think in hindsight, it was both a blessing and a curse. The blessing was, I don't think I would have lasted 3 years working on a project like this in my spare time while I have a full-time job and everything, and keep the excitement going if I had pinned down everything exact so that it was just working down the list. The downside is obviously that so much was vaguely described and left dangling until it was time for me to actually put pen to paper and then actually design things like the bedroom, for example. Like this bedroom in which they're having a discussion was very much the upper decks are supposed to be very fancy compared to the lower decks, which is more of a factory setting. Okay, so what do they look like? Well, I hadn't really given it much thought, right? Until I came here. But then one of the things I didn't, how should I put it? I used to have a scene here, for example. So I used to have a scene here where it was just talking heads. So then I added a page where the lady, after they have this discussion, she has a page to herself where she goes into VR and it shows off a little bit more of the world. And then when it came to actually designing this room, I thought, well, this is science fiction, so these walls can be, TV screens in themselves. And so rather than her putting on a helmet and you don't get to see it, but I have to visualize it in a different way, you get to see everything all the time in the background while they're doing something else. So it's, everyone is doing like multiple things at once. But the fun, of course, this is a lot of fun just coming up with it as you go along and when it is time to do so. And I don't think it's wrong per se. But because there's so much time elapsed from when I started the project, so you come up with all these ideas, and then by the time it's time to implement them, you forget half of them, So, and you come up with new stuff, and then you forget to, like some of the obvious plot beats are like not quite there. Like you think they're there because your imagination is just filling it in. And I think this is where a script would have prevented a lot of these mistakes. It would have bogged me down in the beginning, and it would have taken a lot of the excitement out over a very long project. But I think in hindsight, if I had done that at some point, or at least kept, gotten over this thing that, if you pin everything down, that doesn't mean you can't unpin it or delete it or rewrite it. So yeah, blessing and a curse, the script. Yeah, I think it would have prevented a lot of the mistakes that I'm uncovering now. Another solution that came to mind, trying to come up with a way to make the first issue cool and understandable. There's a this thing called front loading in video games, because they discover that 90% of the players never see all the cool stuff they put in the game because they only make it, up until like the opening couple of hours of the game, and then they stop playing. So the developer's time is wasted in that sense. And I guess in comic books they have a similar problem where people tend to pick up the first two issues, maybe, but then the readership trails off, so they have a tendency to start series over and over again to get them to come back. And so I've been having this thought, like, if this is the first issue and it is the most important issue because it decides whether people will pick up the second issue and stick with the series, because it's the, maybe I should front load some of the story beats that I thought would be much later on. Using this Avengers comic book as an example, there's a quick explanation here on 2 pages of some very big storylines. You get to see the team to come together. And then there's the cliffhanger ending. So these thoughts about front loading and making sure that everything in the story arc is in essence in this first issue, so that you'd want to read more about it as we dig deeper into it. And looking at this little Avengers comic book in which they, very succinctly, like they really, capture the essence of like the Avengers, of what you'd want from an Avengers comic book. Like you see the team come together, you get a glimpse of these epic storylines, like explained to you again in case you're new or need a little reminder. And at the same time, there's something that happens in this comic book to a major character that changes everything on that final page, that is then the hook for you to buy the next issue. And so I had to rethink my ending, because I realized that some pages which were towards the end of issue 1, I discovered that the scene with the kids, there's a whole scene where I show workforce on the floor in the factory setting that I have, playing a game, and it just goes on. And at the time, I thought this was kind of exciting and helped elucidate other things that were going on and like parallel and all this. And now I'm thinking like, okay, I've got all these pages laid out over here. I still have another 7 pages to draw, but they're mostly that game. Surely I could just, heaven forbid, just cut it, and that's gonna hurt. But I think a more fitting conclusion to this story would be the conclusion to the investigation, or the plan not working out, or the 2 groups coming to loggerheads at the end, like a big confrontation that then means a decision has to be made. I made this new page at the end where I show the maintenance people doing actual investigating as well, and then who's doing the sabotaging, getting caught in the act, leading up to a big confrontation. So this could actually be the final panel as far as I'm concerned. But because I have this panel, that's how I came up with the, that's kind of what led to the whole, I might as well just cut those 7 pages that, of the Roughings version that I showed you. I can just completely cut them out. And unfortunately, when it comes to editing, if you can cut it out and nothing is lost, or if anything, things become more clearer, then that scene doesn't belong there anymore. You should take it out. Good. So now we've got script writing, we've got editing, front loading, so moving scenes up to the front because otherwise people aren't gonna make it to the end anyway, and making sure you have some proper development and conclusions that lead to a cliffhanger that make people want more. So how did I learn this? Well, you just saw a little snippet from The Matrix. I spend an awful lot of time in the past year and a half or so making a little fan edit of the Matrix sequels. Come.
That went as expected? Yes. It's happening exactly as before. Well, not exactly.
How can I explain to you as quickly as possible what I've done in a year and a half with this fan edit that, to the best of my knowledge, maybe 5 people have ever seen it? And the amount of work I've put into that, and the amount of fun I've had, but above all, what I've learned about writing. How can I quickly... Okay, let's see if I can draw it for you. So we've got the 2 sequels, so we're going to draw the 2 timelines, and Reloaded and Revolutions begin with a premonition. Then there's a meeting of the captains in which they talk about Zion going to be under attack. There's an impending attack. Then we get to actually see Zion, and there's lots of world building. They meet the Oracle tells them of the prophecy, they go on to the fetch quest to fulfill the prophecy, in which they finally come face to face with the architect who reveals the truth about the prophecy, and Neo makes his choice, and because of it he ends up in limbo, in a nutshell. So the third film, the other heroes now have to save the hero, they have to save Neo, so they go back to hell and they confront the Merovingian. They do so, then the Battle of Zion takes up most of the film. There's a meeting with the Oracle in which, they have a bit of a face-to-face about how everything was a trick. And Neo now has to he realizes he has to go to Machine City to convince them to let him have one more fight against Agent Smith, who's meanwhile taking over the entire Matrix, and the end. So, how did I move things around that helped me learn about how to put a story together, asking tough questions, and taking the scissors? So instead of 5.5 hours, I managed to cram things into 2 hours and 50 minutes. So we start off with a very quick edit of an introduction to the Matrix. The Matrix graphics, you see a bunch of heroes doing the stuff that they tended to do in the first film, which is, they're accused of being terrorists, going in and out of the Matrix, and they're being hunted by the agents. So there's a chase scene where Morpheus and Niobe crash a ship back into Zion, escaping from the Matrix and from the Sentinels. So it sets up Niobe with Morpheus. Then we're in Zion, where we set up the Captain and Morpheus. This is all like 10 minutes. The next scene is we cut straight to the solution to what they talk about here, which is, we're fighting against the Matrix and we're trying to fight against the machines, and what are we going to do about it in Zion? Well, we have Neo. So Neo goes to the Oracle. The Oracle explains the prophecy. Neo is now on his way to fulfill the prophecy. As he's going onto the fetch quest from over here, right, he gets himself into some serious trouble. So he gets himself into limbo. So this part now goes over here. And it clearly demonstrates that Neo is not the invincible hero that he should be, all-powerful. He can definitely still be outsmarted, and it immediately showcases the new villain, the Merovingian. Trinity and Morpheus have to now rescue the heroes so that they become more equal parts of the triangle, so to speak, the Trinity, if you will. And they continue on their fetch quest, which, Architect ends right here. So we take the end of the film and we put that right there. We end the film right here. Now we take this whole part of Zion and we move that over there. Neo has fulfilled the prophecy, he has learned of the truth, he has made his choice, and by making that choice, because he doesn't quite, he doesn't go along with it, he clearly has doomed all of mankind. He now goes back to Zion. There's a big party, there's a big celebration, and you just see the guilt on his face, which before was him not knowing what to do, but now it's the guilt of what he has possibly done. He has to confront his friends and tell them what he has done. So there's a confrontation between the heroes. Some of them believe him, some of them don't. Now they find out that the machines are digging. So now we learn, or Neo gets confirmed, that what he has done has truly doomed mankind. It is exactly like the architect said. They will destroy Zion. And everyone is talking about how hard everything is, like they were doing over here, but it now makes sense because it's a level up. It's time to do play the same game again, but much harder. So they need to go on the fetch quest again to see if they can get a different result. So they go to the Merovingian, but it's not from the third film, it's actually from the second film that we take that one. The meeting at the restaurants, which oddly enough lines up very nicely with the acting, because they act as if they've already met each other, which just goes to prove that, some of the writing was not, and how they shot it was a little iffy. And because now Trinity and Morpheus and Neo show up at the Merovingian and the building is filled with explosives, it fits in with the leveling up of the same game that they're playing. They get the key maker, they end up fulfilling the prophecy again, but Neo making the same choice twice, which is a motif, dooms mankind again. Now what are they gonna do? Now, running out of ideas, he decides to go to Machine City, right? He goes to Machine City, there's the big fight, he saves everyone. This, in a nutshell, is the fan edit I made, and then my hard drive broke. But luckily I had a backup, and then the backup broke. But luckily I had still a version in the cloud. So I managed to download that one to my phone and finish the fan edit after a year and a half. And that is kind of how I repeated what happened to a previous project of mine, which is making a video game, where also 2 hard drives and a computer broke down. And this year, 2 hard drives and a computer locked up. So I had the same problem, but this time with the cloud. Managed to snatch a victory from the jaws of defeat. Yeah, that's how that saying goes. So I managed to finish it, and maybe one day more people will have a look at it. Who knows? But it taught me a lot about. It taught me, like, pulling apart someone else's writing and getting to take the scissors to it, editing it, and moving things around, and really critiquing them, but then also seeing how well they put scenes together. It was a hell of a learning experience. So over a year and a half, it improved my writing and the mistakes I made. And they now, as my story is wrapping up, over a very long period of time, they helped me ask the right questions. And I realized that I was now in this editing mode, just like I did with the fan edit, how I could move scenes around and make it a more satisfying telling of the same story.
So, do you recognize me?
A part of you.
Yeah, that's how it works. Some bits you lose, some bits you keep. I don't yet recognize my face in the mirror, but I still love candy.
thought the other day, doing this on the previous page, just filling in these borders, wouldn't it be easier to speed this up and to use a brush instead of one of these stick Staedtlers? Get my inking on. Yes, it would be, but wouldn't it be even faster if I just get a piece of black paper, cut off ribbons, rectangles, and just stick them on the paper instead? Or would that devalue the original art, you know, if there's just cardboard stuck onto it? I'm just trying to think of little hacks to speed the process up and just to keep things, you know, neat and tidy. Started with the borders this time. Sometimes I leave them out and I just start drawing on the inside and just touch it. Hoping that maybe I'll get a cool look without an actual border drawn on. This time I'm not going to do that. Draw the borders first just to get going with the art. And this ceiling over here, as you can see, I've done some really rough brush work. This I filled in with the thin brush just to speed things up. And as I was doing this diagonal line across, I wanted to fill in between here, but I really like this opening. This is hand-drawn with the brush. One is with the ruler, and then the other one is without a ruler, and it just, I mean, this is really, you know, splitting hairs, I suppose. But it's a very simple way of getting that white line to appear, and it just looks more organic, you know. So draw one with this one and then draw the opposite side just freehand. When I did that over here, however, one, I screwed up, touched the line. Two, I got this interesting texture that looks like a metal pipe, which is totally fitting with, of course, the metal that is going to be in here all over, and is a similar technique as I did on this page with the cabling becoming the border itself. So it really shows that all these panels are connected, and it allowed me to come up with like a little bit of graphic design, because I always felt like in the past that when I try and get creative with borders, one, I simply copy what a lot of my favorite artists back in the day were doing, because I'm not actually coming up with anything myself. I'm just, you know, I want to do that thing that they did. And so I always feel like it's a little bit out of place. And so two, in this case, it really fits in with the scene. What else is on the scene? Like it ties things together. The borders and what is in the scene become one. And so I feel like, yes, I'm doing it. I'm coming up with it, and it actually fits and makes up, and it's not something I'm forcing in there because I'm insisting that I have this cool thing on a page, which sometimes happens. Sometimes you just like you want to do that thing. So the ceiling here, it's not quite working right now, but here's to hoping I can have a little happy accident. So I just gave it a go, put some rough brushwork in there. I'm gonna, of course, continue with these pens, just adding to it. Maybe I'll just completely fill it in with black, because that was the original idea. But I'm hoping that maybe some texture comes out this way, just by trying it out on the actual page. And if not, there is always So speaking of happy accidents, I think you should leave room for things that you might figure out later on, and allow for the space for things to happen organically, not just physically with the art, but just in terms of, you know, like I said, I could have just filled this in black straight away, but instead, that is my plan B. I can still do that anyway. So there's a like fluorescent tube light here. And so another happy accident. This being a science fiction story, things can be a little different. So the first thought was, this being a factory style setting, right? Huge building, so to speak. Do they have rodents in this world? There's no mention in the story if we're in space, if we're underwater, if we're on a different planet, but I thought, like, since I do know where it is, more or less, it's not really that important, I think, right now. What if I get rid of my first thought, which is I have a mouse running around here on top of this fluorescent tube light? And what if instead, scorpion? This is a giant scorpion. And as you know, with scorpions, the bigger they are, do they have 6 legs or 8 legs? Are they more related to spiders or insects? Oh God, no. What have I done? The bigger they are, the less poisonous they are, but the more impressive they are. I always find it fascinating, the thought that there used to be scorpions that were, easily like a couple of meters. Same with dragonflies. With dragonflies with a wingspan of a meter. Could you imagine that? That's just insane. And of course, the fascinating tidbit of science is that insects, they do breathe. They don't have lungs like mammals do, or higher organisms. And they actually breathe through their exoskeletons, through tiny pores. And so the composition of the Earth being very different back then, and the oxygen content of the atmosphere was much higher. We're talking like hundreds of millions of years ago, I think. This is before dinosaurs. And so it was easier for these kinds of creatures to extract oxygen through the pores in their thick armor. And when that content, that mixture in the atmosphere dropped, their bodies simply couldn't keep up with extracting the oxygen and therefore had to decrease in size. And that's why insects today are the size they are. This was a flat pipe going straight down, but then I thought the light from down here would look cooler if I can just have some more obvious shadows in here, just to help build the scene. I need these big black shapes to help solidify and make it more of a solid object. Like with this beam right here, this wooden beam that cuts across. It's a solid object. This is a solid object. There's a lot of texture here from the ceiling. But then this is a solid object, and just a little bit of detail. Add a little bit more texture. Fill in this panel over here. I got kind of lost. There's a glass window pane like this, segmented. It's a little bit more obvious over here on the sketch. Just like that. So we're on the inside of this. Oh. So there's some piping, there's some metal things to one of these, which I imagine to be aluminum pipes hanging from the ceiling. And there's pipes in a different scene where I messed up the texture. It doesn't look too bad, but it's not what I wanted, so I'm gonna have a simple go at it. That's why I keep it like this. steady progress. So I'm quite pleased with how this final panel came out. And I am taking a different approach with this last one because on the one hand I really want to speed up, but I have to try this out a little bit more often. So there's too often I catch myself doing things that then don't go right, so I end up filling it in black anyway. And I always end up thinking, if only I had thought of that before, then it would have saved myself so much time. And this is, of course, when I'm not going for that happy accident I was talking about earlier. So as I was approaching this final large panel, having divided up this last panel into two to show a passage of time, as he puts down the picture frame, being all nostalgic, puts it down, we get to have a look at what's actually on there, which is, of course, the past that will haunt him. And then I started thinking about where the light was coming from, and for once, just grabbing a brush and immediately start filling in deep blacks. Not too much, because I might want to add a little touch of a fine line here and there. But I am very curious to see how this is going to come out and if I can finish it in a timely fashion. So let's see how this page came out, shall we? This is found its new spot already, right over there. Check that. Looks good. Working from thick blacks back into detail. Not sure about that texture in the background though, but I think overall, sometimes, like over here, I try out something new to come up with an interesting texture. I like it. It's not quite there. There's still some funky perspectives that I might have to use whiteout on. This is that whole boxy staircase I was talking about earlier. As you can see, I spent a little extra time here on the perspective, and so it all lines up. The interior of his office, using the wooden beam in his office to break up the panel so you can see him in the top and then on the chair doing his investigating. The windows gave me a really hard time because I wanted to have dirt on them. I want you to be able to see through them. I want that shimmering glass effect. But yeah. Oh, let's not forget the whole skull in a jar. It's there. So let's give it its rightful place, shall we? I found a new spot over here. Adding to the scene and then continuing with the kids and then the intrigue. Oh, sorry, the intrigue on the upper decks again. So that is 1, 2, 3 pages inserted, and right now I am actually working on a brand new page very early on that I want to stick in, where I continue Anne, the girl who's like our focal point in the opening pages, to go up the stairs to visit every single deck. But we see her actually go up to this deck a little bit more so that she can listen into a conversation that the corporate people are having about the captain and the pilot, who they are investigating, so that I make it perfectly clear that there's an investigation going on, why they're investigating, who they're investigating, and so that the original next page, which is when she blows up in front of some people to the captain, make a little bit more sense. And here we have that page right now. You may have seen some of the art already in the backgrounds of the video at the very start. Hasn't been a half an hour. So it connects the two scenes, going up the stairs. She overhears a conversation, introduces two people a little earlier than planned. This gets to be a little exposition where we find out why she is here, that things aren't working, so that when she's reintroduced in the next scene, and she blows up because she's pissed off about things not working, and of course she has to put people in their place. It makes a little bit more sense, as I explained earlier, but also this connecting scene over here when they're up on the roof. So we introduce the last of the crew, the maintenance people, and they're here to see if anything is broken and why things aren't quite working. So it connects things just a little bit better. I've also decided in the meantime, since this is still the episode about writing, I'm gonna add a page here. So let me just show you what the overall layout, now that this is all laid out, how I've organized things a little bit better for myself. Check this out. This is the overview of a 27-page comic. All the pages, what is happening on the page, just a quick word here and there, where it takes place, who's in it, which pages go next to each other, how the page turn goes. Because when making the 4-page mini comic for the anthology, I didn't realize how they planned it out, which was basically 2 double spreads. And I thought there was a page turn, and so once I had to change how that all fit together, it reminded me oh, page turn is really important, and if you mess that up. So in this plan, I really put the pages together that you get to see as the reader. I realized that my flow was being messed up right over here because there's a single page with a single scene that is being cut away to, and that fits. So let me just show you one more time. There you have page 15 and page 18, new to be inserted, and then a brand new ending. So we're just gonna, those 7 pages, we're just gonna push them aside. Maybe there'll be an issue 2. Maybe it'll just be something that happens but you don't actually get to see. Of course, I could go up to 32 pages if I wanted to. So 2 pages to end the issue, and then after that, maybe some editorial, maybe some pin-ups to get to 32, we'll see. But the end is really in sight, and this is how I'm thinking about writing, and it's been very helpful just to have it laid out in front of me. I'm really curious to, I remember when I was doing a comic book digitally, that I was also making something like what I now have before me digitally, and color coding every page, and with outlines of characters, and that was also very, very helpful. But I don't know, there's just something about having physical objects in front of you rather than virtual and having to imagine it. It's just so much more powerful, isn't it? Which, yeah, one of the bonuses of working traditional, for sure. So another thing that happened, some pages missing. Went to the shop, got a new one of these. It's the odd one. Awesome for some inking. And then, check this out. Using this one as a tamaño for scale. So I got some pages right over here, a bunch of them, and they will be made into some sample pages. Oh no. So I've got the original art and then some different attempts at getting that scale. Eventually we figured out it's about 60%. This is A3, this is clearly A4. can see, in length it fits. There's a little bit of a cutoff, but only the tiniest of bits. So this will be, you can see the difference in scale. See how that translates into the line work. See that? A little white out. I was very keen on seeing how fine I could work, because the whole time I'm putting in detail here, and I wasn't always sure how it would translate. So what is the plan? Let me fill you in on the plan. Or is it a secret? I'm not actually sure. Why I'm doing this. Should I tell you? Maybe it is a secret. Oh no. What a tease. What a tease. Well, I can tell you this. I am looking into the very real possibility of applying for jobs as a comic book artist. And so in order to do that, I need to have samples of my work, sequential art. So with the second anthology being put together, and we have the first one, which was 6 pages, and I can use that one. With Fosphor, I've been thinking of grabbing a couple of pages here and there to give a sample of my art and a nice little taste of the story of what this first issue is going to be about. And so this is going to be one of my attempts. So I went to the store to make these copies and to get it down to size, because I need to put in some dialogue, and I'm going to do it traditionally because I'm out of a computer, but that won't stop me. So this is one of the ways I'm going to do it. So yeah, exciting. It's exciting, like grabbing 4 pages and like having this whole debate about which 4 pages to use, you know, because I have 3 batches of 4 pages, not entirely in chronological order as they are in the actual comic book, because I want the 4-page scene to make sense and like to be, you know, compact. So I'll be working on this 4-page sample right over here, getting the dialogue ready, hand letter, cut it up, stick it on, scan it in, borrow someone's Photoshop, getting them ready for everyone to read at some point, or send out for getting a job, who knows. I'll keep you posted. In the meantime, if you've enjoyed this episode, let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to get some feedback on some of the ideas I've been spouting, and of course, if you have any tips that could help me save time, even though I might be a little stubborn and take forever to make my own mistakes and realize like you are right all along, I'd still appreciate it, you know, so that when you gloat in like 2 years' time, you can say like, but I left you that comment, and I'll be like, oh yeah, you did. Yeah, so be sure to stay tuned, subscribe, and hit that bell so you'll always be notified when a new episode of Making Phosphor is up. And I can keep you updated on any Kickstarter that might be happening. Like for example, Peter Palmiotti's Kickstarter should be going live this weekend. It is the 18th of May. If you're watching this, head over, pledge, get a really cool retro comic book in the mail. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for sticking with this very lengthy 50-minute episode. And I'll see you next time. Take care.